Welcome to Hobby with Ollie. My name's Ollie, and this is my hobby. Today's video is all about painting for fun rather than always painting to your highest standard. I'm going to be showing you how I painted the Spellweaver and the Scoundrel from Gloomhaven, which is a game that me and some of my mates have been playing through recently. So what is Gloomhaven? For the uninitiated, Gloomhaven is a board game set in a gritty, dark fantasy world. It's full of monsters to fight, dungeons to explore, and political intrigue to uncover. There are miniatures included in the box for all of the player classes, but up until now, our particular band of reprobates haven't been painted. They've been grey plastics sitting around in their boxes. As I showed in my last video, I love to challenge myself with my paint jobs to improve. But all in all, the Death Company Marine I painted for that video took about 10 hours. While I have now completely finished a second Marine to go with him, this speed isn't really feasible for most people. So I needed a different solution. The solution I decided on is the 45-minute makeover. For each of the models in this box, I'm giving myself 45 minutes and not a second longer to give them a really cool paint job. This should mean that I'm able to actually get them painted in time for our next gaming session, while not compromising on having some really cool little details for them to stand out. You can see that I've already had a go at the Mind Thief and the Crag Heart, and I'm really pleased with how they've come out. There's some really poppy little details, particularly on the Mind Thief's head, where he's kind of channeling that mental energy. Today I'm going to be focusing on the Spellweaver and the Scoundrel, who I painted up with some really neat tips and tricks to keep the paint time short. Hopefully you can learn some things along the way, and if you are planning on following along, I'll also be including all the paints that I used as well. Before starting to paint, I gave my models a prime with Wraithbone spray. Let's start by tackling the purple skin. On the screen at the moment are all the colours that I used to get my effect, and we're going to start from Naggaroth Night. So here we are applying our Naggaroth Night to our model. You can see I'm using a large brush here, and I'm using nicely thinned down paint to make sure that I'm not obscuring any details. I'm also covering pretty much the whole model at this point, which isn't really necessary, but I want to make sure I get every single bit of skin. I'm going to be coming in with different colours later on, so it doesn't matter how neat I am at this stage. The more observant amongst you may also have spotted the timer at the top of the screen. If I'm going to paint a 45-minute paint job, might as well hold myself to account, eh? So tip number 1 is using a large brush and making sure you're not too delicate about putting down your first couple of layers of paint. The next paint that we're going to use is Druchii Violet. This is a wash paint from Citadel, so it's a bit thinner than the previous paint that we were using. Washes are a really good way to get clearly defined shadows really very quickly. You only need one layer of paint and you've immediately got really deep shadows which are going to really set off your model's paint job. Again, I'm going over pretty much the whole model, but here I can focus on the bits that are mostly skin. If you're painting other skin tones, try using different coloured washes. Green for orc skin tones, you could use a sort of reddish colour for human skin tones, whatever suits you though. Next, we're coming on to layering. The colour for this is a 50-50 mix of Naggaroth Night and Daemonette Hide. We're going to be layering this over the skin, avoiding the recesses where we've left the Druchii Violet to pool. What we need to do is really lighten up our skin colour so that it stands out from the rest of the model. You'll see I've switched over to a smaller brush here as I need a bit more control over where the paint is going. Remember, you don't need to hit every single detail. So long as you get the majority, it's going to sell the effect, particularly when it's on a crowded gaming table. The next step is a mix of Daemonette Hide and Warpfiend Grey. This is applied in much the same way, but to only upward facing areas or areas that will really catch the light. Now on the face and some other key areas, I used Warpfiend Grey by itself. I want to avoid desaturating my paint job, so I'm only applying this to very select areas. And with that, that's the skin on our Spellweaver all done. Let's come on to the leather details. I'm going to be starting from a base coat of Rhinox Hide. Get a smallish brush as you want to make sure you're not getting in the way of any details, and slap this all over the leather parts of the model. We're going to shade in just the same way, but this time using Aggrax Earthshade, a brown tone for our brown leather. We're also going to be using Scrag Brown as our highlight colour. With our leather all done, it's time to move on to painting the doublet. There's only one colour for this, and that's Corn Red. What I actually did here was I painted the corn red and the leather at the same time, and then shaded them both with Aggrax Earthshade. This saves a lot of time, and because they're both meant to be leather, it gives them a similar look. However, the two different base colours are really going to set them apart and make it look like we've done a lot more work than we actually have. Time for our next tip. You'll see that so far I've gotten the vast majority of the model painted up without spending too much time doing so. This means that I can spend most of my time painting the highlight areas that I really want to draw people's attention to on my model. On the blue areas, we're going to be starting from a base coat of Celestra Grey. And I'm also going to save myself some time by doing her head and one of the flames in the same colour. The next colour we're going to need is Temple Guard Blue. We're going to be applying this as a layer over our previous paint, so just apply this to the tips of the flames and the tips of the hair as well. The next colour is a 50-50 mix of Temple Guard Blue and white. You can use whatever white you have here. Mine is Vallejo's Arctic White. Again, just focus in on even tighter areas, so you're kind of always making sure that your next highlight colour goes within the confines of the previous one. Finish off with just a tiny bit of white by itself, but this should only go on the very tips of the flames and the hair. For the flames in the other hand, we're going to use a more traditional red colour palette for our flames. Okay, Ollie, got a little bit carried away there. We're going to start with Evil Sun Scarlett. This is quite bright for a base coat, but we want to use it to get our red on the model nice and quickly, as I am starting to run out of time. We're then going to layer that with Jokaero Orange. And again, follow the same steps as we did for the blue flames, putting it on the areas that are raised within the flames. Lastly, we're going to be using our final highlight, Yriel Yellow. This should only be applied to the very tips in order to accentuate the colour. With that, you can now see me frantically finishing up the last few details. Here, I realised that there were actually some flames on the base that I hadn't painted, so I went over them with a sort of purpley colour. A bit darker than what I did for the flesh tone, just to make sure that it can stand out. You'll also notice my trusty hairdryer that may have been popping in throughout the video. This is used in order to dry the paint in between layers and make sure that I can move on to the next colour, not wasting any time. And with that, my 45-minute speed paint is done. Let's cue the time lapse. And so there you have it, my 45-minute paint job on the Spellweaver. Let me know what you're planning to tackle with this 45-minute painting scheme in the comments down below, and be sure to subscribe to me here on YouTube, as well as following me on Instagram at HobbyWithOllie. I also painted up the Scoundrel from Gloomhaven using a lot of the tips and tricks from this video. The highlight colour here was green, and I also focused on the leather armour just to bring it out a little bit, as the vast majority of the model is leather. Let me know in the comments down below if you'd be interested in seeing a full tutorial for how I painted this model. In the meantime, my name has been Ollie, this has been my hobby, and I'll see you next time.